All right, let's go ahead and get started. Good morning. My name is Dominic Del Molino, and I'm the Chief Technology Officer for Accenture Federal Services. We are proud to partner with the Navy League in the 2018 Sea Air Space program. Like all of you, we are especially looking forward to this panel conversation on rapid innovation. As someone from industry, I can say we are committed to delivering the best applicable commercial technologies and expertise to advance your mission. And all of us are looking forward to learning more about how we can help you with programs already underway and those yet to come. As a sponsor for this session, I'd like to share a few thoughts from Accenture's point of view on this topic of rapid innovation. The first is on the importance of a continuous rapid innovation through an open, flexible architecture that is receptive to new ideas and that can be upgraded and refined as new innovations emerge. The second is the need to make sure innovations provide sustainable value and benefits as they are fielded outside of our laboratories, where they become things we need to support and maintain as they become utilized by a broader set of people. And finally, while we need space to experiment, it's essential to deliver an experience that works. Rapid innovation must be accountable and adapts to the people who use our collective solutions and ideas. We must keep in mind that people are at the heart of innovation, and that we need to deliver on the best outcomes and user experiences. Each of these three things, an open architecture supporting continuous innovation, a focus on innovation sustainment, and a commitment to people, have proven to be essential to the rapid innovation we are engaging in now with the Navy and the Department of Defense. We look forward to hearing more thoughts on this topic throughout this session, including on how industry can help you be even more successful. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce your moderator for this session, Mr. William Bray, Deputy Assistant Secretary of Navy Research, Development, Test, and Evaluation. Mr. Bray, over to you.
Great. Dom, thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. Really great to be here, privilege, and frankly to be the moderator for this panel. Very topical. Rapid innovation, it's a great way to start the day on Sea Air Space Day 2. To me, rapid innovation really is about enabling speed of capability to the warfighter. The people aspect, the capability, really taking that directly into the warfighter, but it has to work and be effective as we do that. No more important today than it's ever been. Keeping that competitive advantage today and going forward is critical, and that innovation piece and that prototyping is just a critical aspect. For anyone that's read the National Defense Strategy or listened to the Secretary of the Navy, Marine Corps, CNO, Marine Corps Commandant, or Coast Guard Commandant, they talk about delivering the importance of lethal capacity, being able to get lethality capability to the warfighter in numbers, being able to do it with increased agility. That's that speed and getting that capability out there. And that's just not system development. That's also challenging the processes that we have in place today and figuring out how we can go faster with discipline, either engineering and acquisition. And then finally, driving for affordability as we do that. All that is paramount going forward. For me, the agility is really that critical aspect. It's the agility kind of primes that engine, primes the pump, allows us to go quickly, be more affordable, and get that capability to the warfighter. When you look at agility, to me, that's being flexible, adaptable, creative, and that's creative in not just capabilities, but how we do things and how we execute in contracting, acquisition, bringing the user together to really develop the capabilities the warfighter needs. It's our fundamental challenge. Some of the things that I see that have been going on the last several years, we've made progress in a number of areas, but there's key attributes that I think are important as you look at that rapid innovation. Decision-making cycle, shortening it, really decentralizing and pushing the decision to the right level, making sure the user and the warfighter is engaged up front and early, understanding the requirements, the capability, the need, the gap that needs to be filled. With that comes that prototyping aspect, bringing the capabilities, putting them in the user's hands in an operational environment. eliminating waste, understanding our risks, both the risks that we have and the consequences associated with it, also the loss of opportunity in not going forward. And finally, the acquisition authorities that we have, taking advantage of what's out there today, and also making sure funding and the budget is appropriately aligned across the board. I said it earlier, and I emphasize we do want to go faster, leaner, more effective, but we also have to do it in a disciplined way to make sure what we deliver to the warfighter works when it gets in their hands. In some areas that we've been aggressively pursuing across the board, directed energy, unmanned vehicles, missile upgrades, submarine ARCI program has been doing really rapid innovation for many, many years, Aegis speed to capability. So there are examples that are out there in pockets. It's how do you take on and expand that going forward. So today we have a great set of panel members ready to further the discussion on this topic and get a sense of what they believe are important attributes and where do we need to be heading in the area of rapid innovation. What are the barriers? What are the opportunities? So without further ado, let me introduce our panel that we have today. This morning, to my left, we have Admiral Bill Merz. He's Deputy Chief of Naval Operations for Warfare Systems. Admiral Merz is responsible for the integration of manpower, training, sustainment, modernization, research and development, and procurement across all Navy warfare systems. He's right in the middle of this discussion. Brings a wealth of knowledge, both operational experience as well as experience in the Pentagon. Admiral Stoes, Sandy Stoes, Deputy Commandant for Mission Support, similar role for the Marine Corps. Admiral Stoes is responsible for all facets of mission support with oversight of human capital, life cycle engineering, logistics, acquisitions, information technology, and security. Again, Admiral Stoes, like Admiral Merz, comes with a lot of experience from the operational side of the Coast Guard. To Admiral Stoes' left is General Walsh. General Walsh is the Commanding General, Marine Corps Combat Development Command, and Deputy Commander, Combat Development and Integration. Again, comes with a wealth of experience from the operational side as well as his current job where he's looking at warfighting concepts and how to deliver new technologies to enable the Marine Corps to move to that next generation warfight, 21st century. And then finally, Ron O'Rourke. Ron serves as the Senior Analyst at the Congressional Research Service. Really, that's the congressional think tank. Ron has served there for many, many years, a long, distinguished career, and he'll be able to give us a perspective from the Hill on rapid innovation and provide that perspective for us. So without further ado, I'm going to open up to our panel members to open up with a 5-10 minutes, and then we'll be looking for questions from the audience, and I have a few questions if we don't get many, but looking for your engagement. So Admiral Merz, over to you.
Thanks, Bill. So I'm going to just kind of overview the themes of the Navy going forward, because in the world we're operating today, innovation isn't just about stuff. It covers our C2, our tactics, our strategy, our acquisition, and stuff, but it's all connected together. So this year's theme in the Sea, Air, and Space of Learn and Compete, Win, those themes were specifically chosen by the CNO because those are the enablers for the Navy the nation needs as we're going forward. And each one of those is steeped in innovation as an enabler collectively together to get us where we need to go. So the three enduring themes, and I say enduring as of last year, carried through this year, but as we build our budgets and our plans and our strategy going forward, it's clear that readiness, capability, and capacity can no longer be handled individually or stovepipe. They all have to be linked. They all have to be coordinated together, and that in itself is somewhat innovative. Sounds very simple and direct, but we've allowed ourselves to stray into these stovepipes, and now pulling them together has been the challenge, and also is already starting to bear fruit as we're going forward. So it's always safe to start with readiness. on how we, apply innovation to building a better, more networked, and more talented fleet. Focusing just on capacity, if we don't also account for our readiness, then you probably heard it in previous panels. The most powerful fleet doesn't do much good if it can't get underway, it can't work together. Second theme is increasing capability or increasing lethality. We use those words interchangeably. There's a lot of innovation in here. This is where we get into the specific programs such as directed energy, hypersonics, unmanned systems, and a lot in the networked world. But it's also innovative in how we approach these capabilities in a cross-domain lens, which was the driving theme in last year's development of the President's budget for fiscal year 19. This is working cross-domain to pull together perhaps existing technology that we can stitch together to use to create a different effect, and we've seen some success in that. The underlying new push for this year under the capability is agility, and it's agility across the board, from our acquisition all the way down to how we literally build our platforms. For instance, the new frigate design, one of the requirements is to have up to 10% design margin. These ships are going to be around a long time, and building in up front the ability to adapt these ships based on commander's need on some fairly short timeline is becoming more and more prevalent in the platforms that we build going forward. So making our fleet more capable is, and I said it yesterday, and apparently I hit a nerve in the press when I did that, that our focus is probably more aggressive on capability than building capacity, but the simple reason is we can turn capability a lot faster than we can grow a fleet to 355. So while we're committed to growing the fleet as our foundation going forward, we are keeping a very keen eye on these new technologies that are coming in and our ability to quickly get them out to the fleet to make the current fleet more capable. That said, the current fleet is still too small. We can't be in all the places with all the capability we need to support our strategy, and that leads to the capacity side and the 355 ship Navy. So the 355 ship Navy in itself was somewhat innovative, because in the shipbuilding plan we pushed to Congress, it is by far the most detailed, highest fidelity plan we have put in. And those that have read it, we account for every ship we think we need to buy between now and the end of that plan, and then actually going forward. So that plan brings us to 326 ships from 281 today by the end of the future years defense plan. That's in the next 5 years. And then after we get through our trough of retirements and managing our service life extensions, we're going to try to push it on to 355, hopefully within the plan, with a lot of help from Congress and a response from industry. But much more important, and this is why I hit the innovative key on the shipbuilding plan, is we put a lot of effort and focus on the correct mix of ships. And this is where I have to be careful on how I characterize it, because I do not want to give the impression that we're coming off of a 355 goal, because it certainly is the focus. But it's absolutely important we get the correct mix of ships in that 355, because that's all based on the analysis and lethality we need to bring forward. Anything less than that correct mix will require a larger fleet to cover down on the capability that we need. So it's a challenge, it's complex, it's very much tied to that capability and readiness I discussed, and how we weave that all together is relatively innovative in itself, and has to be the key theme going forward. The new strategic theme for this year is the competitive environment. The CNO used to use this term to tee up a lot of the discussions. Now it is the discussion, and how our adversaries are getting more competitive, and the security environment is much faster paced, much more complex, and therefore much more competitive than it's ever been before. And it's not slowing down. So this whole compete, deter, win has now become the theme now that we have established the balance. We have gotten the support from Congress, And now as we go forward, we're using that as the battle cry, which leads us to the Navy the nation needs, which is our tagline for the maritime component of the National Defense Strategy. It's always instructive to remind everybody that we operate under exactly one strategy in the Pentagon, and that is the defense strategy, which was informed by the National Security Strategy. That's under Secretary Mattis. And we're very grateful that Congress has supported that, the Navy the Nation Needs plan with the recently enacted Bipartisan Budget Act of 2018. That relieves pressure in a lot of ways. Although it came, very late in the fiscal year, it does portend a positive rollover to fiscal year 19, so we can get on these efforts and have some enduring commitment as we go forward. The shipbuilding plan, the ordnance plans, the aviation plans, these are all predicated on a strong commitment by industry to work with the Navy going forward. And we understand that commitment can be sketchy based on the lack of resourcing certainty. And I'll tell you, there's a new, fresh realization of that in Congress. And I think you've seen that reflected in the passing of the Bipartisan Act. The themes, the strategies this year, it's all strategy driven. It's not budget driven anymore. We've taken that out of our vernacular. Again, yet another subtle hit on innovation and how we approach it. And it all leads into how we're committed to reforming to how we do business across the board. So I'll wrap up in case I was too subtle that this innovation aperture is wide. It covers our command and control, the things we buy, how we employ them, our acquisition community, and all the way up to the guidance that we operate under. Everything is changing, and it's changing very quickly. And in my 30-plus years in uniform, I will tell you, I've never seen such dynamic change across that spectrum of tools and guidance that we use going forward. And I'm pretty charged up by it. So with that, I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Okay, great. Admiral Stokes, over to you.
Good morning, everybody. It's great to see the room filled with innovators. That's very exciting. I know we only have one on staff, Commander Andy Howe, who's right here in the front row. I'm really glad to see our international partners here today, too. It's a great mix of people in the room, and I think that diversity is a component of innovation. I thank the Navy League for inviting me to be on this panel and for hosting this panel. I think it's definitely a much-needed panel. There's a lot to talk about here. And from the Coast Guard perspective, and this is the real Marine, by the way, although I love the Marines, from the Coast Guard perspective, innovation is something that everybody needs, and it has to come and be supported at the highest level. And our Commandant's direction includes a statement that, as a Coast Guard, we will foster an organization capable of continuous innovation and learning. So at the core of it, rapid innovation requires leadership at all levels. It's not going to go anywhere without leadership and personal leadership at all levels. And I will say that even more important underneath that leadership at all levels is innovation, especially for a small service like the Coast Guard, is all about the people in your organization and the culture of your organization. And the culture is key. The Coast Guard, we've got our motto is Semper Paratus. So starting going back to the days of the life-saving service, the lighthouse service, we push authority and responsibility down to the junior people. And in the Coast Guard to this day, we have junior people running small boats, commanding patrol boats at a very junior age. And they're on scene, having to adapt and be agile in the most demanding of conditions when you don't know what's coming next. That culture started in our service hundreds of years ago when we were formed. And today, all of our young operators start out with their accession sources, getting an exposure to another cultural embed that's tactical team coordination training, too many acronyms. And that gets people into the mindset of innovating and working together in a team construct to take on challenging problems and adapt and apply adaptive decision making in the operational environment. And rewarding a culture of innovation in an environment where risk is less tolerated, though, is challenging, because how do you do that? Every mistake is instantly visible. So I think that's where we need the leadership at all levels is if we're going to create a culture of innovation, foster the best in our people, we have to be able to be willing to take that risk, the risk of everything being visible, and there's going to be failures along the way. And I would argue that in innovation, you're never going to be innovative without failure after failure. And maybe sometimes the more you fail means the better you're going to actually be, but you have to understand that at the leadership level and take that risk. And we need, in this people category, so critically important, the Coast Guard, the United States, we will always outcompete the enemy because we have the best people. And we have people who have intellectual curiosity, critical thinking, they've got insight, they've got perseverance, they've got the inquisitive minds that we need. Those are the kind of young people we need to get into our armed forces, and that's the kind of people we're trying to attract into the Coast Guard. A few things about the Coast Guard's innovative excellence in the rapid innovation area. We're very small, so we have to partner. And I think that actually is a strength. A lot of the other agencies in DoD are a little bigger. They've got a lot more resources to bring to bear. But we do a great job innovating how we tag on and partner with the national labs, with DoD, with the interagency. And in fact, we recently, a couple years ago, up at our Research and Development Center, which is applied research up in New London, we partnered with the Department of Homeland Security Science and Technology Directorate to form a Science and Technology Innovation Center up there, what we call a STIC. And that's a partnership with DHS, and they fund research projects for the Coast Guard that will help improve our operational performance and get technology into the hands of our operators as quickly as possible. We're also partnering with the DHS Procurement Innovation Lab to leverage the full range of FAR and other transaction authorities that are contracting authorities to speed up the procurement cycle to get innovative technologies on contract as soon as possible. We have Ideas at Work, a cloud sourcing platform that we've created a culture of people going to this cloud sourcing platform to have idea challenges and to use it innovatively to come up with innovations from the grassroots up. It's hard to get the people on the tactical edge to feel empowered to and have a vehicle to get ideas up in this crowdsourcing application that we call Coast Guard Ideas at Work, run by the famous Commander Howell here, has really led to a lot of great ideas for the Coast Guard. And we recently, in fact, had our first ever Shark Tank event intended to put great ideas from the tactical edge up to senior leadership to get a look at those. And that was really fun. We had that off-site, so it wasn't at Coast Guard headquarters, it was at a venue somewhere else so that people felt, the young people who were bringing the ideas forward to the senior leaders felt more comfortable and empowered to present those ideas in a Shark Tank type of environment. I want to just mention two case studies really quickly, and one of these rapid innovation case studies is going to be along the lines of contingency response, which the Coast Guard is our bread and butter mission, and the second will be capability delivery. So to no great surprise, the contingency response example I'm going to use is Hurricane Harvey. So who here was involved at all last year in the hurricane season? Harvey, Irma, Maria? Not many hands, not too many hands going up. That was a all hands on deck effort, so I'm surprised very few hands in this room. There's a lot of people involved from the interagency DoD, the Coast Guard, the state and locals, run by FEMA, but the Coast Guard certainly on-scene presence. We've got the authorities to be oftentimes the first in scene, on scene. We don't need to have the authorities, we don't need to be asked in like the Guard does. We go in on our authority for life-saving. We rescued 11,000 people and 1,500 pets, don't want to forget the pets, during Harvey. But it wasn't standard. This was not a standard rescue if there is such a thing. So our helicopter crews and rescue swimmers and our mission planners on the ground had to develop innovative solutions on the fly in real time, employing social media, cloud computing, and other technologies. So for instance, our pilots are used to putting a Latin long in and going to rescue somebody. Well, they were getting, we were getting calls, postings on Facebook and other social media of street addresses. Here's my house, I'm in distress. How do you vector a helicopter into that? Well, we use GeoSuites. We adapted technologies on the fly that we found, and a lot of the young people were doing this. Academy cadets up in New London thought, how can we get into this game? They don't want to sit there as students in their classrooms when they can get involved. So the GIS class went ahead and the students got together, the cadets, and they went ahead and contributed using social media to geolocate people and press those heat maps up to our command center so they can vector rescue resources in. And the real-time feedback that we got from the field enabled us to know what was really important, what to focus on, and it shortened the policy cycle by years as we developed lessons learned, kind of on right there, living lessons learned. Normally, the lessons learned take years to develop. Most of you know that. We did it pretty quickly. The capabilities delivery example, this is our small UAS. So we know we need in the Coast Guard the small UAS. There's lots of UASs we all need, but in particular, we need to get something where we can send a small UAS out to investigate maybe a search and rescue call, see what's going on around the cliff there or whatever it is. And so our capabilities directorate has developed a Group 1 UAS prototype program initiative called GUPPY. Who doesn't like that acronym? It's established as a mechanism for testing this short-range UAS program while simultaneously developing the program of record. So you'll have the pilot program allowing the operators at the tactical edge to go out and find a short-range UAS that they can start using while back at the headquarters. People are remote pilots looking to start developing their capabilities and look at what the requirements need to be so that we can get this UAS technology into the field as soon as possible. Then once we get that program developed, we'll go ahead and revert back to a program of record. But at least for the initial hot start, we are trying something pretty new where we are allowing certain units to volunteer and say, hey, I want a prototype, and we'll let them go out, get the technology they find wherever they can find it, start using it, and we start to evaluate it right concurrent with the process. And so I will say that to finish up, the way ahead for the Coast Guard, we really need to speed up policy cycles in critical areas such as capability delivery and acquisition. We need to distinguish between the simple and the complex acquisitions and projects and maybe adjust our admin and our oversight requirements. We need to really be able to deliver quickly our especially reliable operational mobility and wearable endpoint devices. Those are big things for the Coast Guard. And that comes with some challenges because the rapid innovation is great. There's a lot there. But sometimes when it comes to capability development and delivery, you got to have the infrastructure to support that too. So IT infrastructure is a challenge, and we're working through that. But none of these opportunities come without challenges, and that makes it all the more fun. That's all I've got. Thank you.
General Walsh, over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Desembray. I also like attending these and just sitting up here on the panel, just listening to everybody talk. You just writing notes and learning as we go. But innovation is all about collaboration, and that's why we're in this room here, and it's collaborating. And I look at a lot of you out there, you're not wearing the same uniform that I am. So therefore that you think differently, and I'm looking forward to learning your ideas. And getting out in the industry floor, there's just the opportunity to really think how other people are thinking. So I'll try to share some of my thoughts on Marine Corps innovation and where we're trying to go on it. And I think, as Admiral Mers was taking, trying to get to a competitive environment and warfighting superiority, in today's world, so much of it is accelerating in that innovation, and how do we accelerate faster? And that speed of innovation, we talk about that so much. And everybody, what I would say, at the levels that we work at, is the push to go faster, the push to modernize faster, both from the top, from senior leadership, and then also from our young Marines and sailors that are constantly pushing us to go. So it's coming from both ends. I will also say the technology is really driving a lot of that. So I think the technologies you look at, we talk about getting away from industrial base ways to do requirements development, capability development. The technology is moving so fast too that we've got to think and operate in different ways because it goes so quickly. I find it very interesting with this administration, and certainly with Secretary Mattis and the folks that he's brought in. If you look across the Department of Defense and where they came from, many of them have come from business. They weren't all necessary creatures of the Department of Defense and grew up in the Department of Defense. Many of them are from the outside in. And I think in industry is obviously a very competitive environment. And I think that's driven a lot of our competitiveness and a lot of the strategic direction from the top on looking at different ways. Why are we doing it the way we are doing it? How could we do things differently? How can we innovate faster? Many times in their case, you're innovating quickly because you're innovating for profit. And if you're not innovating quickly, you're going to be put aside or your sectors will lose and they'll cease to exist. So I think part of that is that competitive environment that leadership has brought into the department, and we feel that pressure along with that technology side. The other thing I would say is the strategy. This is probably the first time in a very, very long time that I would say that I've felt, from my perspective, that we've had very, very clear strategy in the Department of Defense with the National Defense Strategy. And from a Marine Corps perspective, that strategy really helps us go, okay, this is where we need to go. Just like in an industry, a corporation has to have clear strategy where they're heading. And the same thing with us is, and now we have that with the National Defense Strategy. And I think from our perspective, the strategy drives our concepts. And much of what we do is a concepts-based requirement system. Our concepts really drive us to where we go, but the strategy is driving our concepts. And really the strategy based on the threat driving our concepts is a key piece of where we're going. So we've spent a lot of time down at Quantico developing the Marine Corps operating concept, which is really our capstone concept driving our concepts. We've also worked very closely with the Navy on littoral ops in a contested environment, how we work together with the Navy in operating in contested littoral environment. We also have in the process of finishing up with the Navy another subordinate operating concept, Expeditionary Advanced Base Operations. These concepts are really driving our innovation. In fact, when I leave here, I'll be going down to Quantico where I'm hosting with General Perkins down there, the multi-domain battle concept symposium. So we're down there. So our concepts really drive where we're trying to head, because the concepts are really a collaborative way to really bring us all together to focus on where the strategy wants us to go. And it comes from the operational concept side, but also functional concepts. So the functional concepts really help us where we want to go. If you look at the Navy and Marine Corps, we've been a very innovative force over many, many years. I think we look a lot at what we did in the interwar years. Back when the Marine Corps was coming out of World War I and looking at where we were going after that, were we going to be a continental land-based force, or we were going to go back to our traditional roots of being, traditionally with the Navy? And the decisions that were made back then, threat-based, a lot of the exercises we did in the 20s and 30s, Calibre exercises, of fleet experiments that we did, really drove us from a threat-based to concepts to where we wanted to go. In the mid-90s, the Marine Corps stood up the Marine Corps Warfighting Lab. That has really been an engine for us to really drive change in where we want to go. Because the Warfighting Lab, when I say Warfighting Lab, different than a research lab. The Warfighting Lab connects our concepts together with our operators. And that is the key thing for us to go fast and be able to go. We've got to get that operational input. We get it through urgent UNS processes. That's certainly one way. But getting those operators together into our exercise and experiments is really a key way to go. So one of our key things that we have is our Sea Dragon experimentation process. So taking those concepts and putting a clear focus for the year on what our experimentation is going to be in Sea Dragon. That's our large experimentation process. And all the experiments drive to the concept through Sea Dragon, and they go fleet-wide across the operating forces. So I think the lab is a key one to do that. Also, Brigadier General Wortman, who is the commanding general of our Marine Corps Warfighting Lab, he also is the vice commander for operational Office of Naval Research, ONR. So it ties that in, DARPA, into the lab, and we're able to bring S&T and a lot of the R&D capabilities in to help us with going faster. One thing that I think that we've really leveraged as of late is the Advanced Naval Technology experiments. Through Daz and Bray's office has been a really, I think, an eye-opener of we can do a lot of things ourselves in the Marine Corps, but leveraging the entire Department of Navy and seeing how the resources within the Navy can really help us go faster has been really a very rewarding experience that we've really been at now for just over a year. And we've done two major ANTEXs, or Advanced Naval Technology experiments. And what that really does is we focus on a problem and let industry, academia, the research labs, and our operating forces all come together and play in a sandbox together. And they focus on the problem set. So last year we focused on ship-to-shore maneuver. How are the Marines and the sailors going to operate differently and get ashore differently in today's contested environment than we have in the past? And in this one we just completed with Daz and Bray out at Camp Pendleton 2 weeks ago was our urban 5th generation advanced naval technology experiment. And again, through a series of workshops throughout the year, then we bring together all the technologies, and we had over 100 in both of these that we brought together, technologies, and got them in the hands of our operating forces, and got them in the hands of Marines to be able to see what the technology will do and how it will impact our operating concepts, and see if they'll improve, change our concepts or concepts of employment within those operating concepts. And that's where I think getting the industry together with the scientists, the Warfare Center, engineers, and really solve the problem. Not us tell them what we want, help them solve the problem. And in many cases, it completely opens our eyes up to new, innovative ways to do business that we weren't thinking of in the capability development area. So I think that's a real driver to what we try to do. We also have a campaign of learning that we do across the Marine Corps operating forces. We have a Marine Corps Center for Lessons Learned that's within the Marine Corps Warfighting Lab, that all inputs from across the operating forces, or really anywhere across the Marine Corps, come in with ideas on what we should be doing, and lessons learned. Those lessons learned drive into the campaign of learning, and monthly we have across the forces a forum that gets together to look at what's being learned across the Marine Corps and where we should drive into our capability development process. And quarterly, I have a quarterly futures review with the 3 stars that kind of look at what's going on across the operating forces to see what are the good ideas that we should bring forward into the capability development area. We also have brought in the Rapid Capabilities Office. It's something we stood up about 2 years ago, and we've brought that into our warfighting lab and tied that very closely together with Marine Corps Systems Command and also our Capability Development Directorate, by bringing people from those organizations together into our Rapid Capabilities Office to be able to rapidly prototype and spin some things out as quickly as we can. And then engaging in industry, I can't emphasize that enough. On seeing what's out there in industry and how we can leverage what industry is doing to go quicker. And what I would say is we can do that at the small level, on smaller programs in what we call a rapid prototyping, experimentation, and demonstration capability within the Department of Navy. Smaller projects that we can bring forward really quickly, COTS, buy, try, decide type things. I talked about it, the Yantexes, and how we do that and bring those things forward, and then rapidly try to prototype those. A lot of those things, when we take those into these advanced naval technology experiments, we'll pick some of those and we'll move them forward into a Bold Alligator or Dawn Blitz, and then move that into a fleet exercise, see how that impacts the concept, what the warfighters think, and then from that bring that into the capability development process. Whether we buy it or whether we put an RFI out to industry and say, hey, this was something we learned, now we want to go after that idea. We also can do it on our large programs. When we talk about under the Maritime Accelerated Capabilities Office, which comes under the same process within the DON, but our larger MDAPs, Major Defense Acquisition Programs, or ACAT-1 programs, we can do that also very quickly. By bringing that into that process and taking a look at, is there something that's a commercial off-the-shelf capability? Things we're looking at right now is a sea control missile capability, or improving our air defense capability that we haven't had for a long time with the threat we've been dealing with in Iraq and Afghanistan. Take a look at something that's commercial, off-the-shelf, bring it in, experiment with it, buy a small quantity of it, put it in the hands of our operating forces, see how it operates and develops, and then from there rapidly go into a capability to grow that even further, or to be able to put that out for an RFI for industry. So industry constantly helping shaping our requirements process is another way to do that. So that's just some of the ways from big to small on how we see innovation. Thank you, and look forward to your questions.
Great. Ron, over to you.
Thank you. I should mention at the outset that these views are my own and not necessarily those of my employer. I'll be presenting options in this presentation, so it's important to note that these are options, not recommendations. CRS does not make policy recommendations. These are just ideas inject into the conversation. First, in terms of legislative authorities for rapid acquisition, which was mentioned, I think, at the outset, it's worth noting that there are a lot of these that have been put on the books in recent years. I can't even keep track of all of them. That doesn't mean that there aren't room for some additional innovations in that regard, and I'll be mentioning an option for a possible additional one in a minute here. I want to talk about the relationship between innovations and surprise. In other venues, I've mentioned the fact that I get a little bit tired about us always being surprised by what other people are doing. That's a game that both sides can play, and I would like to see us present surprises to the other side to throw them off balance, and innovations can have a role in that. So for me, it's always important going into the topic of innovation to link it back to, among other things, the idea of surprise and throwing the other person off balance. Innovations can be done quietly, and I think at the outset was mentioned the example that I like to bring up, which is the Acoustic Rapid COTS Insertion Program. That's one of the early examples of walking the walk on open architecture, and very quietly it has been building a new submarine force right under our feet without really a lot of public commentary. But the improvements in capability that you get through each boat in the Archie program measured collectively are almost the equivalent of putting additional boats into the force. Innovations and rapid acquisition can happen through unlikely or modest-looking kinds of acquisition strategies, like using a parent design for your next class of ships. The Navy did that with the ship that was known originally as a mobile landing platform, and then was evolved further again into the ship that we now know as the Expeditionary Support Base. The Coast Guard took advantage of that in the Fast Response Cutter program. They're doing it now with the Polar Icebreaker. The Navy is now taking advantage of that, along with the Marine Corps, in terms of the LXR program and also the new frigate. It's worth noting that there are innovations not just in acquisition, but also in concepts of operations, and that was mentioned just a minute ago by the General. New ways of using things, whether those things are new things or in fact old things that have been around, but you're figuring out new ways of using them. And innovations, particularly in concepts of operations, aren't discovered in headquarters. They're discovered in the field by the sailors and Marines, but they need time and space to discover how to use these things. They can't do it if they're being run ragged, meeting demands for deployed forces. So even though innovation is sometimes posed as an alternative or a substitute for having more force structure, in fact, having enough force structure to meet demands while also providing some time and space for discovery and experimentation can actually support innovation. Innovations can refer not just to what is being acquired, if you're focusing on innovation in acquisition, but how you're doing it. And here I think it's worth mentioning that during the 20 or 25 years of the post-Cold War era, we developed an acquisition paradigm that seemed focused on preventing or minimizing cost growth and schedule delays and problems in testing. You can think of this as like a zero defect approach to acquisition, and that may have been appropriate for the post-Cold War era, where we had luxuries of time and capability overmatched to pursue zero defect or immaculate acquisition of that kind. But the post-Cold War era is over. It started ending around 2006, 2008, and the process of it ending and shifting to the new era we're in was pretty much complete by 2014. So in this new era that we're in, we don't really have luxuries of time and capability overmatched the way that we used to, and consequently, avoiding cost growth and schedule delays and problems in testing are still metrics of value. I don't want to suggest otherwise, but they are no longer necessarily the only measures of merit in an acquisition program, and pursuing those goals to the exclusion of everything else might only mean so much if it also means in the end that you lose the war. So what's needed is an added focus on top of those other existing measures of merit on other metrics as well, such as timely delivery of some form of improved capability and some degree of tolerance for problems in the development process. Indeed, it might be argued, and I think the Coast Guard Admiral argued it just a minute ago, that if there are never any problems in the development process, then that's a sign that we might not be moving quickly enough to ensure eventual victory. So everything I've said here about this is not new. It's been said by others. In fact, Frank Kendall and others have been saying it since at least 2014, if not earlier. My point is that the fact that it still bears saying today is a measure of how slowly the process of changing our acquisition paradigm appears to be proceeding. I shouldn't have to say these things, but we're still here using these measures of merit, in some cases almost to the exclusion of other things. Now, in terms of acquisition innovations, there are others that, again, have happened quietly, and for the Navy, that involve the use of multi-year contracting. The Navy moved into that in a very big way in recent years through multi-year procurement and block buy contracting, and the Navy saved many billions of dollars in its ship and aircraft acquisition costs as a result of that. That's things that could be paid, those are savings that could be used to pay for a lot of other things, including other innovations. In contrast, the Coast Guard has not used these processes at all. So for the Coast Guard, getting into multi-year contracting can represent an innovation in acquisition and a catching up with where the Department of the Navy has been for many years. And as I have testified repeatedly over the past 3 or 4 years, there are a lot of savings that the Coast Guard could achieve if they were to move smartly into this. On the offshore patrol cutter program alone, if you were to apply multi-year contracting across the entire 25-ship program, you could save, I estimate, about $1 billion on those ships. That's enough to pay for an icebreaker or to pay for 2+ OPCs in that program. And the other thing to remember about this is that the Coast Guard doesn't always get things the way the Navy's always getting things. The Coast Guard goes through periods where it gets stuff, and then it goes through, and then a generation later it gets it again. That's because they're a smaller service, and they go through these peaks and valleys. So what that means is that right now we have a once-in-a-generation opportunity to save this kind of money in Coast Guard ship acquisition. If you don't do it now, you won't see that opportunity again in your professional working lifetime, quite possibly. Now, in terms of new acquisition authorities, I said I would return to that. There's a lot of them on the books, including the one for cross-procurement program of common components across nuclear-powered ships. This was included as a provision in the statute that governs the National Sea Base Deterrence Fund. But that raises the possibility of, well, if that's an idea for the nuclear-powered ships, maybe you can also have a legislative authority for cross-program acquisition of common components for the non-nuclear-powered ships as well. Let's move to carrier procurement. The Navy is looking at a 2-carrier buy of some kind. That could reduce the collective cost of those ships, but that would not be an innovation. We've done that before. We did 2-carrier buys back in the 80s, not once but twice. So if you want an innovation in carrier procurement, well, if carrier procurement is being shifted from 5-year centers to 3 or 3.5-year centers, you can then think about doing a 3-ship block buy across a period of 7 or 8 years. Now that would be an innovation. Let's move to LHA procurement. There's a possibility of accelerating the LHA that currently shows in the FY24 column to FY21 or maybe even FY20, and that could help reduce the cost of the ship by achieving a better learning curve with the previous ship. That would not be an innovation. That's just something that's known to happen when you bring ships closer together. But if you want an innovation in LHA procurement, well, consider the fact that we've built 2 LHAs that are very aviation-centric. LHA 6 and 7, they don't have a well deck. They are really much more airplane-oriented for reasons that we can get into later. But if you were to insert 1 or 2 additional LHDs into the shipbuilding plan above and beyond the current requirement for LHAs, then when those 1 or 2 additional ships enter service, you could take those 1 or 2 LHA 6 and LHA 7 and operate them as adjunct aircraft carriers while you are waiting to achieve a 12-carrier force on a sustained basis, which is something that cannot happen until the 2030s at the earliest. So that would be an innovation. Let's move now to building small surface combatants and the industrial base for building ships generally. Right now we've got a couple of LCS yards, and there is concern over what is going to happen to one or both of them when we shift procurement of small surface combatants from the LCS over to the frigate. But instead of looking at that as a problem or a challenge, one option would be to look at it as a possible opportunity. You can build frigates in multiple yards, including one or both of the LCS yards. Or you could use those LCS yards as feeder yards for building major components of larger ships that undergo final assembly at other shipyards. The Navy already has some experience with the concept of feeder yards. They essentially do that to some degree and have been right from the outset in the Virginia-class program. They've done it in the Zumwalt-class destroyer program, and it's less well known, but in fact, the Navy did it in the LPD-17 program as well. So more broadly, you can also consider expanding the industrial base to include other shipyards. That could include yards that have bid for programs like the OPC in the past, or which are bidding right now for the Polar Icebreaker. That's an indication that these yards want to get into military shipbuilding. Or you can think about reopening yards that have closed, like the Avondale facility or the Philadelphia yard. These are yards that can build certain kinds of ships, maybe smaller ships or perhaps simpler ships, or again, they can act as feeder yards to help relieve any capacity constraints that we might be facing at the existing yards to achieve 355 ships faster. Or it could lead us to changing the force planning question that we ask ourselves. So instead of asking the traditional analytical question, and I've always supported good analytics to undergird Navy acquisition, but instead of asking what are the mission demands and what are the ships that best fit those mission demands, and then how well can the industrial base build those ships, we could, if we get into some kind of national security emergency situation of some kinds, might be in a position where we might want to ask ourselves instead, what kinds of ships can the expanded industrial base build, and what kinds of innovative operational concepts can then be used to maximize the value of those ships against our mission demands? In other words, you build the kind of Navy you can build and figure it out the best way. That's not an optimal way to build a future Navy, but again, if we were to get, for some reason, into a future situation of a national security emergency, that might be the kind of thing we might want to ask ourselves. So again, to reiterate at the outset, what I said at the outset, these are options, they're not recommendations, they're just ideas that I'm trying to inject into the conversation. But if you were around about 15 years ago, you might remember the term defense transformation, which was the innovative-oriented push or concept of its day. And if you were around back then, you'll remember how that concept, though well-intentioned, evolved over time into a slogan or an intellectual fad or fashion. And if that fate is to not befall the current emphasis on rapid innovation, then considering options like the ones that I've just mentioned might be of some value. So thanks for taking the time to listen, and I look forward to your questions.
Great. Thanks, Ron. So over to the audience. Any questions? If not, I will tee one up for the panel to initiate discussion. Yes, over here.
Hi, I'm Steve Moretto from Department of Navy. In 2006, I became an expert on national energy strategy, and this question pertains to that. So in the context of a lot of the countries that give us problems get their revenue from oil, I was looking at algae fuel. And it looks like if there was some rapid innovations, we could be producing all our own algae fuel and have many of these facilities producing in our congressional districts, creating jobs. So in that context, should algae fuel be a vital priority for the DoD?
Does panel, anybody want to take that one, or I can?
Yeah, I'll take a swing at that pitch. So in the destroyer design, we have kept a window open on biofuels, including gas-based fuels, obviously nuclear power, is something that we're committed to on the right platforms. And right now we're including alternative fuels on one destroyer as a test platform. One of the challenges with the alternative fuels is basic brute performance of the ship when you need it. So we're trying to figure out the balance of, gas turbines versus alternate fuels versus alternate fuel to those gas turbines, and completely different fuel sources. So we're coming around on that. We've made our ships exceedingly efficient over the last 20 years, so that has relieved some pressure on how far we think we need to challenge the performance we need with the efficiency we're trying to get. So it is part of the ground-based performance design every time we go after a new ship. We're very active in that community. We do leverage naval reactors, which is our nuclear side, but they also have a strong DOE hat. So they have connections with fuel cells, alternate fuels. So it's a continual part of our dialogue. And most recently, we have made the commitment to one destroyer. See how that goes as we're looking at the frigate coming on. We'll inform that. So interesting to us. We're trying to learn from it. But it is an opportunity cost on the performance of the ship that we just have to keep in mind.
Thank you.
Yes, over here.
Good morning. My name is Ken Karkoff. I work at NAVAIR, Office of Small Business Programs, and I'm also finishing a thesis for the Naval Postgraduate School on market research. So my question is, we heard a lot of things about innovation. I think we need to be as innovative with contracting approaches and market research. We talked about the acquisition authorities. The General mentioned dialoguing with industry, which I think is great. Admiral Stas mentioned OTAs. Navy doesn't do that very much. What are some of the ways that we can be innovative as far as doing our market research and really communicating with the industrial base and really looking at the small businesses, the ones that are really non-traditional suppliers to DOD? They don't want to work with DOD for a whole host of reasons. And that's where a lot of the innovation and agility really comes from. So what can we do from the big Navy, big Marine Corps perspective to try to tap into that industrial base and move forward as innovative as we can be as they can produce the products for us? Thank you.
Okay. I'll pile on that one just real quick, and then I'll turn it over to the panel. To me, small business is a key as we look how do we build capability and deliver it. One of the things that we've looked at very strongly is the ability to bring people together from some of those non-traditional DoD small business entities where IT capabilities and algorithms and things are coming together. So it's similar to what General Walsh has talked about. Once we identify what the problem area is, the key is making sure we can convene and bring those right people in to help us solve that problem early. And then I think taking it into that operational environment with the small business or large businesses or the labs and research facilities, centers, it really gives us an opportunity to look at the technologies that are out there and do it very broadly. I think that's an opportunity. I will tell you, as we did the Urban 5th Gen going in, we had a list of technologies that we felt, sitting down with the user, were going to be really great. But once we got that technology out into the field with the warfighter, we found out some of the things that we anticipated being fantastic bubbled down. So I think you got to do that engagement right up front, getting the user in the room, getting the small business, and figuring out what is the problem we're really trying to solve, and then get it out and experiment with it and learn from it. Again, the failures help because it does help us figure out what's working, what's not working, and how to get better. Panel, any other?
Yeah, if I could just kind of add to that is one of the things I think we see is a lot of times when we're dealing with our larger size programs, we deal with the major defense industry partners.
Yes, sir.
So sometimes they are the integrators, and we can't get down to the lower levels sometimes to be able to talk to those people that have some of these really good ideas. So I think, like Daz and Bray said, is these industry forums that we have focused on a problem. I'll give you an example. One we just had was our armor reconnaissance vehicle, looking for a new replacement for our LAVs that we have today. So we had a focused couple of industry days that focused on a problem, but we opened it up to everybody. And we brought in a lot of folks from industry, and it was a lot of the smaller businesses, a lot of the sub-suppliers. And we had them in there in that forum, and they drove a lot of the ideas. So it wasn't necessarily that we we weren't maybe getting them from the major companies, but the ideas were coming from the smaller ones on what type of capabilities should go on the vehicle. You know, and that drove a lot of the innovation, which will help our requirements development process. So the ability to collaboratively get down to the people with the ideas, it's not always the big defense integrators. Sometimes it's at that smaller level. And then on the smaller size of these opportunities to have these advanced naval technology experiments is an example of that's come one, come all. Show us your technology, we'll take a look at it. And in this case, if we would have started off on ourselves and said, you know, how do we get a amphibious combat vehicle to go maybe faster? But we looked at the problem, how do we get ashore differently? And a lot of these smaller businesses came in with completely different ideas. Don't focus on the vehicle, focus on the things that are out there in the battle space and augment your concept.
Thank you, sir.
Very quickly, two addendums. Open architecture can take big programs and make pieces of them accessible to smaller businesses, and the Navy has been doing that in at least some of the open architecture efforts that it has underway. For example, again, in the ARCHI program, when you're looking at improvements that are software driven and you're looking at new algorithms for a little piece of that larger software program, small businesses have been able to contribute improvements. So open architecture can take a large program that is managed by one of the defense primes and make it accessible to smaller firms. And the other concept, which I just saw mentioned the other day, is the idea of having a reverse industry day. Instead of having the military service stand up and tell industry what the military service thinks it needs, the military invites itself to a meeting where it allows industry to tell the military what the art of the possible is. And so I think reverse industry days can help with that as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the Navy has seen so many valuable inputs from the small business community. You know, matter of fact, we have an office in the Secretariat run by Emily Hartman, who is under this current environment of accelerated acquisition, get faster, be more competitive. I mean, this is the environment for small business. I think Mr. O'Rourke mentioned the Advanced Rapid COTS insertion. That was a small business initiative that has now become the model for modernization for all our platforms, and we're trying to get everybody on that train. It's a complex scenario, and I think that complexity favors the small business because they can innovate, I think, typically faster. If nothing else, they just have a smaller organization to get their ideas through, less people to get in the way to say no before they get it to the people that may really be interested in the idea. So if you don't know Emily or you don't know of her office, I would tell you she probably has more work than she can handle right now.
I worked for Emily for 8 years, sir.
Yeah,
I'm very familiar with Emily.
Well, that's
and
a
what
good
she
sign.
Yes.
And just look at the small business commitment at Sea, Air, and Space. You know, every year the floor acreage, it's the most quickly growing takeover of the floor of the display floors.
That's
every
a
year
good
we
news
come
story,
out here.
sir.
Yeah, that's right. So keep at it. I think the apertures are open. I would tell you, you can certainly email me directly if you run into a closed door or a hurdle. I'm sure Bill would say the same thing. But we are looking for your ideas, and we're looking to mainstream those as soon as we can.
Thank you for coming. Thank you very much.
And I'll close out with that question. The other piece I think is it gets to the contracting aspect, which you asked about. You know, oftentimes we have a toolbox with one tool in it, and we try to use that no matter what the job is. And I think being able to expand the toolbox to look at what are the other tools that are out there from a contracting piece, whether it's price challenges or other transaction authorities or IDIQs, or the traditional contracting, those are all options. Now, what we have to be able to do is make sure we use the right one for the problem at hand. And so having many tools in the toolbox, I think, is a critical piece. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Can I add one more thing? I will sometimes get a telephone call from a small contractor, and what they are looking at, what they're looking for is just the knowledge of how to approach the Navy. Now, I know the Navy has small business offices and bureaucracy, and they have a lot of efforts underway, but those efforts are not reaching some of these firms that are not already knowledgeable in how to approach the service. And so one possibility for the Navy would be to simply set up a site. It could be nothing more than a web portal that says, if you're a small business and you need help and you need to have us hold your hand, please contact us and we will help you. Because they're calling me, and I can't really help them that much. They're not finding whatever the portal is in the Navy. The Navy needs to make one that's like really basic and says, if you're a small business and you've got an idea and you don't know who to talk to us. And you might get some people calling.
Okay, thank you, Ron. Yes.
We live from Navarre. I've been working on innovation, but a lot of times I wonder what is the real innovation is. Admiral Stolz talked about cultural innovation, but what's the difference between cultural change and cultural innovation? Is cultural innovation a subset of cultural change? I'm not sure. And also, it's like a EMARS or like a railgun. It took about 25 years. Are they really innovation? I don't know. And also, in high energy laser, it took something like 15 years to develop from 1 kilowatt to 150 kilowatt. Is that really innovation? I think I myself is not clear. So what's your opinion about that?
I guess I should take that one since my name was mentioned. So I believe an organizational culture has a more foundational element than change. So the culture is a product of your people, and over time, the way that you approach innovation, business, as individuals and as an organization, change, I think, is often looked at in terms of policy and structure. So organizational change, business process reengineering that enable maybe rapid innovation. So I think change is an enabler in one way, because of course you could have a debate on all different ways to look at change and innovation. But I look at innovation as something that resides in an organization with their culture and the people and the leadership, those softer skills, and then those are going to take advantage of the technology that's changing out there. You're going to maybe change some of your business processes and your policies to accommodate a culture of innovation. That's probably at least a little bit of one kind of an answer.
Okay. All right. Next.
Hi, good morning. Megan Eckstein with U.S. Naval Institute News. I'd like to go back to the thread that Admiral Mers mentioned on capacity versus capability. So for those of us on the outside of this, obviously, if the Navy invests money in buying a ship, then in X number of years you get a ship and you know what you've gotten. Whereas when you invest in innovation, you're not necessarily sure at the outset what you're going to get out of it, on what kind of timeline. So I was wondering for the whole panel, kind of how you continue creating a culture where it's safe to fail and you can innovate versus balancing that with some sort of accountability for the money that you're spending and being able to ensure that there will be a capability increase by the end of it.
Any takers on that one?
I'll take a real quick shot. Is being the Coast Guard, we're small, we're constrained by budget, so we set an amount we're willing to fail at. We don't let it go on and on to where it's a point of no return. So I think that's important, is having boundaries. We have partnered with the S&T. They deliver us some resources to support a project, but we've got some bounds on it. So I think setting boundary conditions up front will enable you to mitigate some of the risk.
Yeah, I would also add, and Ron mentioned it earlier, building from the ground up an open systems architecture approach, modularity, that gives you flexibility over the long period of a ship or an aircraft to add in capability going forward. So I think that's an important piece. And Admiral Mers mentioned, leaving that 10% design available in the frigate design. Those are kind of things that I think thinking ahead before we deliver and build becomes a very critical part as we need to pace the threat or our adversaries going forward. And Joe?
I think the open architecture, that 10% that Des and Bray mentioned are two real good examples. The other one I would add is, and it doesn't work for everything, not probably for the major MDAPs, but a lot of the things we'll procure in a small amount. We might buy 4 battalions worth and see how that's going with 4 battalions worth, and then see what the technology's doing. It could be a small UAS, a Group 1 UAS or something like that. Go buy 4 battalions worth, see what the Marines like. If they like it, we continue to buy more. If something else comes in that looks better, then we change out and go to that vendor. So I think that's another way too, is don't buy the whole thing all at once, but set incremental buys up.
Hey, thanks, Megan. This could go on a while. I'll try to keep it short. But I think you're getting to the real heart of the matter of who's with us on this, and we use the term, hey, we need to just break the chains. You can get a good idea, even in the N9, which is the largest organization in OpNav. I have a series of wickets and throttles, and then our board of directors, Congress. We have to get through all that. And I will tell you, the authorities have been mentioned several times. That was a huge step in the right direction. That literally allows us to leverage mature technology, to stitch it together in different ways to create that effect. I put it in the cross-domain lens when I did my opening remarks, but it really applies to technologies as well. So we can, just leap ahead of what we call the DoD 5000. Most of the testing and evaluation side of that. Based on the maturity of the technology to get things very quickly. And we have a lot of recent examples, too recent probably, to get to Ron O'Rourke's remark. Why are we still talking about this? We've known this train's been coming for quite a while. So as we run into these hurdles, we may sound a little counterintuitive. We realize we actually have to stand up an organization to shepherd these things through in a hurry. And that organization is called, clever name, the Accelerated Acquisition Board of Directors, and it's chaired by Secretary Gertz and the CNO or the Commandant of the Marine Corps, depending on what the topic is. And those inputs can come from virtually anywhere. They come to the N9, and we put it through a series of very quick questions. All right, can we develop this? Can we develop it quickly or accelerate it? And then should we? Because there's an opportunity cost every time we do this. And sometimes things, frankly, don't need to be accelerated. If they're properly phased with its replacement and the threat leverages that, we can keep it where it is and not be resourcing disruptive by moving to the head of the line. Because when we vote on an event, and we meet quarterly, but it's an ongoing process, it moves to the head of the line, the head of the resourcing line, with Congress, within the Navy, and we are absolutely committed to it. And it's typically, believe it or not, small dollars, but it needs that blanket of that bubble of protection, so nobody can poke through it until we get through typically a demonstration to show that this thing works. With the full commitment, and this is one of the other lenses we look through, if this thing works, are we going to commit to it or not? And if it doesn't work, all right, no harm, no foul. So nobody's in a hurry to fail, but boy, is it better to fail up front with low dollars invested before we do this commitment, because nothing we do is particularly inexpensive. And the stakes are typically high. So that demonstration will also typically answer all those questions. Yeah, it's doable, we can do it safely, and let's get on with it. So this is a relatively new approach, and a matter of fact, it's shepherded by my colleague here on the right from both the Marine Corps and the Navy. And as a matter of fact, we're just going through our second iteration of the instruction because our terms were kind of confusing and created a lot of vertigo. But now we have probably half a dozen efforts going through this thing, and there's no limit to the efforts, but these are the ones that have gotten to the point where we're actually demonstrating them, and they may fail, and we're ready for that. And the beauty of this board is the whole chain of command understands that, you know, the high probability of failure, and everybody's okay with it. And then we're off and rolling. So I think we're chipping away at it. We're just finding our way with this structure. And as I said in my opening remarks at yesterday's kickoff panel, that, you know, it seems like, you know, the inchworm is just crawling across the page right now. But as soon as we hit a few of these inflections, I think you're just going to see it take off. Thanks for the question.
Thank you.
Rushdie Barsum from the Office of Naval Research. The shipbuilding industry is very traditional. We changed from wood to iron, and we're still working with iron. There is no way we can build all the ships we want to build with this technology fast enough for the next decade. The DDG 1000 took over a decade to complete. Why? Because the composite top was built to aircraft standards, not really ship standards. We have been building boats for 50 years, they last forever. So what I'm trying to go against this industry is a hybrid ship, that you make steel frames like you have in skyscrapers that take earthquakes, that are designed to take the most severe forces as any ship would take, and then fill all the water side with composites, cheap composite, fiberglass. You can use the entire boat industry to build you panels that close the ship, and it can be made non-magnetic. Use stainless steel for the frames, and the rest is composite. You can use the bridge builders to build the frames and have the ship yards assembled. They are great in integration. This would involve not just the shipyards, but the entire construction industry. You can build a ship of any shape. You look at the Zumwalt, the USS Zumwalt, when it was originally designed, was really to have a beautiful curved shape. You cannot build that with steel, but with steel frames and composites, you can do that. ONR spent about $25 million in trying to really come up with technologies that support this hybrid type construction. But it's very difficult to go against a ship industry that is 150 years old in this business.
Yes, sir. That great insight. And I'll tell you, you know, in the past where we were probably over-prescriptive on all elements of shipbuilding, I think you'll see we're coming out of that quickly. The frigate design, first step in this one was go to industry first and ask them what's the art of possible. And no specification of hull material in that design. So I would turn that to industry on if you have the technology to build a composite ship or pieces of a composite ship, weave that into your proposal, and with the benefits and any negatives that go with it. You know, I'm very aware of the composite technology of ONR. You know, under our restructuring a year and a half ago, ONR now has a hat under N9 as N94. So I keep up to speed on those. And I think with the frigate design and going forward, we're going to be wide open to those kind of discussions.
Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you for your excellent panel. I just want to follow up on the gentleman's previous question. I work for a defense prime that specializes in steel curved ships, but I'm sure that we can learn from you, sir, and we'll look at composites. I do want to follow up a bit on Megan's excellent question too, and it's about risk. Mr. Bray, you start off in your opening remarks. We need to understand risk, and each of the service deputies has talked about risk as a component of really getting at rapid innovation. But Mr. O'Rourke, I'd like to go to yours, where you basically said there's something of a mismatch between what we talk about accelerating capability, we talk about rapid innovation, and on the other hand, we're still talking about risk, and we haven't really got to kind of a new risk posture. And I wonder, with kind of some hundreds of folks that want to support the service's objectives for more rapid fielding of capabilities, if you have some options that you've considered for industry to be able to help shift our risk posture and to help the services get to a more informed or faster risk posture that will allow faster fielding of capabilities.
A couple things. First, in terms of changing the acquisition paradigm, if that is what people want to do, it's simply a matter of evangelizing it and talking about it in forums like this or other venues until such time that people are aware of it and are comfortable with it. You just have to keep socializing the change. That's how it happens, by talking about it. And even though the idea that I brought up earlier is years old, it has been very slow to take hold, and I think in part because we simply don't bring it up very frequently at meetings like this, which is part of the reason that I did in my presentation today.
Yeah. Well, if I could just make an observation on that. I think there's a lot of, quote, evangelizing, but there's a somewhat different message being transmitted by you, who are responsible for generating the requirements and getting the capabilities to the fleet or the force, and the folks that are responsible for executing it, the systems and Naval Sea Systems Command and those types of commands, who have this charter to execute, and they must get on schedule, and they must hold the costs, and they must be very responsible executors of this risk, and somehow bridging the gap between the evangelizers and the executors.
There is a test case here, which is that about a year ago, the Navy began asking for authority to use a limited amount of R&D money in a more flexible manner without tying it to specific efforts or outcomes. And that proposal went to the Congress, and in effect it serves as a test case to see whether there is acceptance of that, because for Congress to give up control over the use of appropriated funds goes against a traditional notion of congressional oversight and powers and prerogatives.
Still
but the
asking for
trade-off
that,
would
by the
be
way.
to provide that flexibility for experimentation, and that became a test case, I think, of the kind of thing you're asking about here.
I also think there's, Mr. Gertz has talked in other forums about the user risk aspect, right? And that's why I mentioned sometimes there's a risk of not doing something, because that may take longer. And sometimes if you went to the user, depending on the capability, they may say, hey, I'm willing to take that 80% solution, and as long as I can get the capability today, and then go work on the 20% to make it better over time. And sometimes we don't. I think it gets back to Ron mentioned earlier, right? Sometimes it's hey, we want the whole solution, and we're going to make sure we mitigate all the risks through that. That's a careful area we have to look at, but that time is something that a lot of times we don't look when we do our risk calculations. It's an opportunity loss.
So, as an active duty admiral, you think in that term of risk. And to follow up on Bill's comment, I mean, there's acquisition risk, kind of the world you live in, and industry risk, and there's also operational risk. And I'll say today, we've made no differentiation. We just apply oppressive risk reduction without stratifying at all. So, Bill talked about having a toolbox to help the small business and how we apply it. It was also a toolbox of risk that we can apply. So we, especially in the accelerated acquisition side, if we pull the operators along with us and they declare it good enough, then it's good enough, and we send it out there. And typically, at the end of the day, we're all kind of cavemen. That, hey, look, as long as I get to the point where I'm not going to kill myself with this thing, then it's probably good enough. And let me take it out there and try. As your job as the previous mine warfare commander, we've learned that rapidly fielding some of these early unmanned vehicles probably saved us 1 to 2 generations of development just by putting it in the sailors' hands, who can write their own code, sitting with the industry partners, and fixing it on the spot, coming back. Okay, this is really what we need you to build, and now they're all over the world as we go forward. So this is an element we probably have not put enough attention on, but I think now we have set the environment where it's time to look at that risk stratification and really get people comfortable with owning the risk. Now, I will tell you, we're also putting more pressure on industry to share the risk with the Navy, especially when it comes to delivering a product that we all agree is what we paid for. And Secretary Spencer has been very aggressive with that, and he's gotten a very aggressive response, very aggressive positive response from industry. So again, we've talked about reform and the management team that we have in place. We've been talking about reform as long as I've been in the Navy, but not with this kind of team. When you have the DepSecDef from Boeing and you have Secretary of the Navy who's run several companies, that's the pedigree you need if you want real reform on how to get down to the DNA level of industry on really where are these hurdles. I said in my opening remarks yesterday that I have made a general cry for tell me where the hurdles are, and I've gotten a general response. Well, I don't come from industry. I'm learning fast. I slept at a Holiday Inn last night and all that. But I am surrounded now by a team who has lived that. So I think you're going to see instead of you giving me an input, I have to go learn what that even means and then respond to you. We're dealing with a team now that immediately knows what that means and is acting very quickly on it. And again, it's a big, complex organization. So I see a lot of people nodding their heads. So I think that's a positive indication. You may have experienced that. Not everybody has, but over time, just understand the environment is distinctly different than it has been in the past.
There's one proven way to get people to change their risk calculation, and that's if someone else is doing it. Right? That's what I mean by we don't have the luxury of time and luxury of capability overmatch anymore. I don't want to be in a situation where that's what you need to rely on for a culture to change, but because if you rely on that, then by the time you change it, you may be too late, or you're at least starting off kind of behind the 8 ball. But it is one forcing function for bringing about a change in people's approach toward risk in acquisition. And when you look at China and what they're doing in areas like quantum computing and hypersonics and artificial intelligence and the huge effort they have underway in unmanned vehicles, then we may find ourselves surprised by what they do with large fleets of unmanned vehicles married up to AI, and something like that, or something in hypersonics or whatever, could change people's idea toward risk again. I don't want to have to rely on that, but it is something that may happen. And in terms of a difference with the prior experience with the Soviets during the Cold War, the Soviets were very good in certain technologies and put a lot of effort into it. But the Chinese can do that too, and they can do it at a scale and with an amount of financial backing that is even beyond what we experienced with the Soviets. And I'm not sure we have fully internalized what it means to be against a competitor that has a strategy, a playbook, a game plan for developing technologies and can apply an enormous amount of resources and organization to implement it in a sustained, determined manner. But as we begin to see the results of their efforts along these lines, then the fact that someone else, especially China, is doing these things could have the effect of changing people's risk calculations here.
Okay, since I failed at my one job as a moderator, which is to get done on time, we'll do one quick question if we can, and we'll try to give a quick response, and then the rest we'll have to pick up another time. So last question.
Thank you. I'm Rob Winston with Impacts, which is a partnership with the Navy to rapidly spin in technology from small businesses and academia. My question is about how do we change the culture of the workforce? So innovation is all about the people, the culture, and process. We have a large DoD acquisition workforce. How do we change those GSs 12s, 13s, 14s, their thought process, and get them on the innovation train?
I'll take that one real quick. I think we need to really tack some of our training curriculum and traditional training methods that we've done before. So really getting how do we do innovation, being able to teach that at DAU is part of traditional acquisition. Also, one of the things we're looking at is how do we use social media or social systems to be able to share info across the board. Looking at the NRD&E, the Naval Research and Development Establishment, if I have somebody working on quantum computing, at Dahlgren, I certainly would like to make sure they're sharing info with somebody at Pax River or somebody out at Port Hueneme or wherever, so we can all understand where we're going. I think that helps that collaboration that we need and making sure we're on the right things.
One quick addendum to that. We might also consider the option of making it more easy or more common for people to come into the federal workforce at a midpoint in their career and then leave it and then maybe even come back. The idea that you get into the federal workforce at a young age and stay there forever, which is the model that I personally have followed, it has certain strengths. But if you want to talk about changing attitudes or importing attitudes, then bringing people into that workforce and out and having more of a circulation of employees in and out so that they can work in the private sector and then come back into government and bring those ideas back in. That too, I think, is an option for doing something with the workforce. In other words, you're not talking about it as a workforce that channels through time. It's one where people are moving in and out from other forms of employment all along.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the audience. Really great questions. A lot of great questions. Just to close, I think what you heard here today is it is a strategy-driven perspective approach that we're taking here across the board. Leadership is clearly all in. They're looking at how do we take on additional risk to innovate, move more rapidly, get that capability out to the fleet, lethal capacity, agility, affordability. The workforce is a key piece, and I know Mr. Gertz, my boss, is very focused on how do we change that workforce or get that culture inculcated at the lowest levels and throughout. Certainly, we're all open for ideas, anything you may have. We're looking at how do we do different things differently, look at different perspectives, and innovate. I'd like to thank the entire panel. I thought it was great feedback, and if you can join me in applause for them. And I think we'll close this session out. Thank you very much.
Good to see you.